Hello there. Good evening. Welcome to my kitchen. It's Deborah Irene, and it's Good Friday, April 10th, 2020. It's hard to imagine we're in that year. This week, I've read to you a couple of stories about my ancestors, primarily my Aunt Lizzie and my mother and some of my other aunts, and just going back to the basics and the simple things, the simple lives that they had, remembering things from that era. And I want to read to you tonight a story primarily about my grandmother. But first, let me tell you a little bit about my three books, because family members are in all three of these books, and I'd like to help you understand why. Now, my first book that was published in 2011 is Reflections. And I wanted to write a book about people in my life and talk about the good things. And I had this concept to write a brief little chapter, really just a few paragraphs about people as they came to mind. And I decided that I would use their name or their title as the title of each chapter. And so I started writing Reflections in 2010. I had been thinking about it a long time, but started writing it in 2010. When I started writing the book, or when I was in the middle of it, I started a blog as well. And I was told to blog about what's going on in your life, or the events of your life that day, or people in your life. And so that's what I did. While I was putting together Reflections, I started blogging. And then I finished Reflections, finished it and published it in 2011. It's just a short book, and I thought, I could keep writing forever because there's other people to write about, but I wanted to get at least one book out. So I finished this book and just left it a short, very short book of vignettes. I always felt like it'd be great for hospitals, gift shops, or doctor's office waiting rooms because of the short inspirational chapters. When I got that book finished, my mother wanted to tell her life story. And so I started working on her stories and helping her with that. And so we started working on what came to be titled Helen's Heritage. Now, since these are her stories and it's her life story, but since I talk a lot about family and Reflections, certainly some of the same people are in her book, Helen's Heritage. It took me 5 years to finish telling her stories, and we got this book published in 2016. The whole time I'm still blogging and telling my own stories. I had some stories published in magazines. And so when I finished that, that's when this book project came along, because I wanted to compile all those stories together. And I also wanted to encourage other writers to write. But since I tell real life adventures in everyday life, in my book, Someday I Will Write, there are a lot of the same people that I talked about in Reflections and that my mother talked about in Helen's Heritage are also in Someday I Will Write. Now, this week I've talked a lot about my Aunt Lizzie and my Uncle Hike, because their home was really special, and they were country people and lived off the land and made the most of it. And I love those stories. And I was thinking the other day, my Aunt Lizzie was my mother's oldest sister. Aunt Lizzie was the oldest of 16 children. She was born in 1905. If she were alive today, she would be 115 years old, and that is really hard to imagine. It just seems like yesterday. But it wasn't. And my mother was born and 29 years after Aunt Lizzie, and my grandmother was 46 years old when she had her. So she was 17 when she had Aunt Lizzie and 46 when she had my mother. So you can see why Aunt Lizzie was very much like Grandma Lizzie to me. But I want to focus on her today. And she has a short chapter in my book, Reflections, because she was very special to me, even though I was only 3 years old when she died. Oh, let me read you this story because I do remember her. She is chapter 6 in my book, Reflections, and I titled the chapter Mammy. I remember you sat down in the chair with a baking pan full of freshly washed apples and a sharp paring knife. You were a robust woman, like most women in our family as they approach their twilight years. A full apron covering your soft printed dress, your lap made the perfect work surface, I remember. As you selected the first apple, making a slight incision near the stem, I sat down on the floor in front of you to observe, hoping for a bite of the apple. You began the circular motion of peeling the apple, and I made sure you were aware of my desire. As the peel began to form a coil, you gently spoke to me, explaining how these apples would be used in our dessert for a later meal, an apple pie, and how delicious and nutritious the peel was. It was the very best part of the apple. By the time the peel of the first apple fell into the pan, this almost 3-year-old little girl was a believer and was in awe that you were able to accomplish this without ever breaking the coil. I'll stop there and say, I was actually thinking about trying to peel this apple as I read the story, but I think I would break the coil and it wouldn't have had the same effect. My grandmother made one perfect coil. There, you said, try for yourself. I grabbed the peel and savored every bite as I watched you start the same process with the next apple. The perfect coils fell, one after another, until the task at hand was complete. I remember. Yes, I remember, even though some in disbelief thought there was no way that I could remember. I was too young, so they thought. Someone must have told me that story. Oh no, I remember. You were loving, kind, and funny. You played patient while I played doctor. The shot hurt, and you let me know it. But when it was time to go to bed for the evening, the roles reversed as you carefully applied vapor rub to my chest, covered the ointment with a t-shirt, and helped me put on my pajamas. I remember. You clapped your hands and tapped your feet as I hula hooped. You let me drink coffee with cream and sugar in a china cup. You had a safe place to play, the courtyard in the front and the backyard lined with flowers. And if I became frightened because of the stranger in the alley, you quickly came to the door to my rescue. I called you Mammy. I remember. How much I would have loved for you to be with us longer. I missed you so much over the years, especially the teenage years. I wish there could have been years and years to remember. I once told Aunt Lizzie, your oldest daughter, how much I missed you. She smiled and said, so do I. Aunt Lizzie knew that I remembered. As I think back on the apple coils, I am reminded of the circle of life that continues through the generations. Your gifts and talents were present in your daughters. I watched Aunt Lizzie make homemade biscuits for breakfast, churn butter, collect eggs from the hen house, and make homemade ice cream. I witnessed her make a peach pie once in about 5 minutes. I was amazed as she rolled out the dough, laid the peaches in the pie shell, threw it in the oven, and announced she was ready to go. I was in awe, much like watching your apple coils. And how could I forget Aunt Eunice? Returning home from church, quickly slipping on an apron over her Sunday best, and promptly preparing a meal for however many family members decided to show up for dinner. I remember. Years later, your youngest daughter, my mother, passed on the awesome skill of making and canning apple butter. As we worked up the apples, I once again remembered the apple coils falling into the pan some 30 years earlier and somehow felt you were smiling down on the process. As each jar sealed with a ping, I felt a great sense of accomplishment. My mother was correct. Each ping was a reward for a job well done. Music to my ears. I remember. I do not remember your passing, and that I do not understand, except perhaps I was too young, as others suggested. I was told that your love of flowers was on display at your funeral, more flowers than one could imagine, and I was told that one of the last things you said was, "What a beautiful yellow." Perhaps that's why I always loved yellow. I remember that was to be the theme color in my wedding. Your nativity set is displayed on my coffee table as I write, and I wish you were sitting here with me at this very moment, enjoying the reflection from the flicker of the candle on baby Jesus. I am thankful that somehow God expanded my capacity of recollection to remember you, the good things. And what an honor if in the coil of life someone would say of me, "I remember." And you know, when it gets right down to it, during these uncertain days that we are in right now, that really is what's important. Family, and remembering the struggles that they went through, and knowing that we can get through them as well. So I hope you enjoyed story time today with Deborah Irene. I'll be back perhaps on Easter Sunday with another story. You take care.